Today on the podcast, I have Logan Yonavjak. She is the co-founder and CEO of the Founder Readiness Institute in North Carolina. And this is a fun conversation. It's basically, I would say, every investor says they're betting on people and not ideas, but almost none of them can actually tell you or evaluate the person behind the pitch. And so Logan's product is basically trying to take a stab at that, trying to give more quantitative information about the team dynamics, how they work, where they're going to have stress points, where they maybe have some failures, and basically make a more informed decision, either an investment or helping them grow. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed the time with Logan, and I hope you do as much as I did. Logan, welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you making the time.
Thank you so much, Todd. It's great to be here.
Well, good. Before we get into kind of talking about your background and stuff, you spent like 2 decades in impact investing and conservation finance. Like, what's the through line between like forest and farmland that really gets to like measuring founders' readiness?
Such a good question, and I'm happy to explain my thought process there. Well, I would say observation led me to solving people problems, which is how I describe myself and my company now. And really, it was observing teams and leaders in positions that I've held in the investing world with startups and in mentoring and helping startups. Just often I see innovation stalling or, lack of success in a company or team because of the people problems. And I mean, lack of leadership capacity or just disputes between co-founders or founding teams. And so I started out in my career wanting to solve natural capital problems and climate issues. And I realized that without solving more of the people problems and leadership capacity challenges, we're not going to get to some of those other outcomes. So it felt like putting the cart before the horse a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that we don't really, it depends on the situation, right? I'm making broad strokes generalizations, but in large part, I've seen a lack of dedicated kind of support for, and we're talking on the early stage investing side and company building side now, I've seen a lack of support for what is arguably some of the hardest jobs in the world, like starting a company, managing a startup. And it's interesting to me because if you're going to be an astronaut or if you're going to play professional sports, you get a lot more attention, assessment and coaching than you would doing something like launching a company with $1 million to $5 million in the bank. So that's kind of what led me down this road. And I still care very much about the issues I was working on before, but I care to solve, I think I'm in a better position now to help solve the people problem challenges.
Can you give me an example of this? Like, I think I get the theory, but is there like an example that you can anonymize a little bit about, hey, this is a great idea. I'm worried about the team, whether it's about your skill set to actually go do it, team dynamics, leadership, experience. I mean, there's a whole range of things, but like, is there something that can make this concrete to like give people a good grasp of the example?
Yeah. So I worked with a startup. This was a number of years ago, and the CEO was a very empathetic individual. Like, he did a great job. We would call it his team climate IQ was high in the sense that he really created a sense of psychological safety on the team. He was really good at motivating his teammates and listening to them. And at the same time, he had what we call a harmony bias. And so he would take in everyone's feedback, but he had a hard time pivoting and figuring out how to execute on that information. And so it created a lot of stalls in what needed to be a fast-paced environment. He would sit back and he didn't really want to offend anyone. He wanted to take in the information and digest it kind of indefinitely. And so it really prevented the growth of the company because he would just continuously ask for feedback and never do anything with it. And so I'm highlighting 2 of our constructs here. One is the team climate IQ, which was higher, and is purposeful agility, which is all about how do you pivot quickly with the mission, keeping the mission and goals in mind, was lower. And so it was causing this mismatch. Like, in reality, he wasn't necessarily the best to be the CEO, or he needed a COO, like a person coming in and really dialing in the methodology and framework for actually making decisions and moving on decisions.
So that's an interesting one. I guess I would ask the next question to it, which is saying, are they good at figuring out what, like they take all this feedback on it, but they don't know what to go do with it? That's a decision-making process. Or they know what to go do with it, but they don't want to alienate because they don't understand the change management leadership piece of it. And so I guess what you've articulated is there's a problem, but like to me, it forks pretty hard in both of those directions where it's like saying, do you not know the right answer? Or do you know the right answer, but you don't know how to change management and lead it?
Yeah, I mean, I think in his case, it was the latter. He was just, I think he knew what to do and had a good sense of what to do, but he didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings or kind of misstep. So that's where a coach would come in and sort of, or you'd put a plan in place where you'd have like, okay, you need to bring in a CEO by this date, or we need to have check-ins where you're telling us like how you're going to make this decision over the next quarter to meet these milestones. So some sort of intervention and to help this individual like with his leadership capacity. So
yeah. I always think that like backgrounds are pretty interesting, right? I think almost all entrepreneurs have kind of some interesting background, and yours in particular, right? You went to Yale and got an MBA and then a master's in forestry at the same time.
That's correct.
That's unusual. But like you're straddling two worlds. Like did it shape kind of the way you thought about risk going forward? I mean, there are some similarities and themes through that. I would think risk and understanding and developing how to think about risk, which kind of goes to your business today, would be something that would lead to it, and that's some training towards that?
Well, I was coming at it from the lens of how do we widen the aperture of investment decision making to incorporate what is widely known as negative externalities. In the case of ecosystem services, which are the services that nature provides, like clean air and clean water, they're not typically incorporated into the financial cost of doing business. And so I was trying to find creative ways within the investing frameworks and lingo and analysis to bring in these costs and more of a true cost of impacting the natural world. And so what I found was, environmental social governance topics, if you frame them in the sense of we can help lower your costs, we can help reduce risk, we can help improve revenue. Like if you were able to frame issues within those three frameworks, you had a better chance of making the case that, yes, we should incorporate these externalities. So to give a concrete example, I worked for a farmland investment group, and I would, as the head of sustainability, and I would talk about like, well, if we incorporate this sensor technology on our farms in, Indiana, then we can reduce the cost of water. And so that's a plus. Well, that's sure. Impact investing. And so I'm just taking that frame now with the people risk, where I'm like, okay, if you're going to invest in a company and deploy like anywhere from 100K to 5 million at an earlier stage, don't you want to know if this person is coachable? Like, are they going to, how good at they're relating to other people? Like, don't you want to know a little bit more about the internal mechanics of this individual or team before you make a decision, or afterwards to support them?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess my pushback a little bit is like entrepreneurs are messy. They really are. I mean, I think like I wrote an article fairly recently about dirty fuel versus clean fuel, and really saying that a lot of entrepreneurs come to the table, their motivation is a chip on their shoulder. They have dirty fuel as they run. And it's not right or wrong. It was just a combination of understanding. Yeah, right. It's understanding where you're at. And so when you think about taking that kind of messy set of situations and characteristics and what they do under stress, and then putting it into a framework of 6 constructs and providing a score, how well do you think that matches, right? I get that this is a massive step in the right direction, but it's like, and I think of all the entrepreneurs that we've worked with, is there some categories that this fits in, or are these just lenses that help you better gauge where they need opportunities to grow, or where they have strengths and where they have some weaknesses, and you got to help them manage it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said a couple of things. I'll try to parse them out. I mean, one is, yes, I think entrepreneurship is messy, and is our capability going to completely evaluate a person's ability to lead? No. But our current status quo is reference checks, gut check, and warm intros is the tendency of like the early stage investment community of how they make decisions. So what we're arguing is, isn't this better than the status quo? Like, wouldn't you like to know a bit more, even if we're not capturing everything? And yes, there are outliers, et cetera. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is we scoured the literature, thousands of research articles, and we found the constructs that we chose, these 6, coachability, purposeful agility, emotional IQ, et cetera, they were the ones that showed up in the research when people have studied entrepreneurship as the ones most directionally, positively correlated with positive company outcomes. And so this is, again, you're not able to isolate every trait or capability of a leader, but these are the ones that showed up, in patterns over and over. And so that's what we based our initial assessment on.
That's good. And I completely agree with this is a quantum leap in the right direction. One that's personally I've struggled with is you see good entrepreneurs that scale, right? You hear this all the time, right? Like if you can get a founder to kind of scale with the business, that's probably better for the business as a whole. They're somebody that believed in the vision and then they can carry it through. But understanding kind of where they start in their journey, and that could be really small, and then figuring out where they top out. The coachability is certainly one of it, but it's I always have this joke whenever I'm working with entrepreneurs as they're scaling. You have to almost forget what you learned 50% of what you learned last year and learn something new. You just don't know which 50% it is, right? Because it's a constant evolution. And whether that's communication, whether that's execution, whether that's strategy, whether that's board management, all of those things continue. And so I'm kind of curious and to me, this is, as I've done a bunch of angel investing, that's an area that I always look at to say how much scalability does this person have? And we have people that are a mechanical engineer that basically end up, getting to $15-20 million and going from zero. That's great, but that's not the story of all of them. They all have they either top out or they need a fair amount of coaching to make the next jump. And so I'm just kind of curious on your experiences on that front.
Well, what we're measuring at its core is the ability, how someone is likely going to behave, think, and act under pressure and with complexity over time. And so I think one of the things you're pointing to is a person's ability to manage complexity. As a company grows, it gets more complex in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And so I think there are definitely very naturally people who are good at the first beginning phase and then kind of need to cede to someone else who's better at managing at that level of complexity, or have seen those patterns before. And so we're actually able to pinpoint with pretty good accuracy, where you should fit in a company cycle as well, and also industry specific roles. And also not everyone should be a CEO. We're also looking at team and complementary skills. And so, yeah, I think that pressure cooker, that level, working with complexity. So I'll apply it again to coachability, which we call coachability and identity flexibility, by the way. It's, because you have to kind of be able to change identities based on and your attachment to those ways of being as the company scales, you as the leader. But essentially, if you're earlier in your coachability journey, you're going to be more focused on the self, you as an individual, how you respond to people giving you feedback is probably going to be a little bit more defensive because you take it as a personal affront. And as you evolve into this complexity, you're able to hold 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different perspectives at once objectively. And that helps you to see the opportunities to move the system as it needs to move and not get attached to the outcome as much. So those are the kinds of things we can pick out in someone's transcript, essentially, is those kinds of patterns.
That's interesting. I guess I always think about this as I see young entrepreneurs start off as very authoritative, right? They're basically doing it themselves. Then they get to some sort of delegation where they're basically bringing staff in. In a lot of cases, they're telling them what to do because they're still the experts in this. And then you try to get them to give ownership, right? Where then you're creating departments and ownership. And then over time, you're really trying to get them to invest in those individuals and do more development. And those threads are not like linear and they're just, serial. They can happen overlap, but there definitely is some shifts in the way that people do it. And you talk about identity and stuff. I guess I look at it as prioritization. I think that good founders of these actually are pretty good at figuring out like my priorities are changing, right? Like I have 100 things on my list, but like the things that I did last 6 months need to shift and I do need to do something different. And so like, I think you're saying similar things. I just see them maybe more tactically, like a little bit like in some of it, but it does translate to me and does that. Does it resonate?
Saying that, yeah, I mean, prioritization is to some degree related to being able to hold multiple components of a system and then decide what to do with them. So it's kind of a combination of what we would call strategic complexity and then pivot, the purposeful agility, like coming together. Yeah. But yeah, I think these are really important things to get at the next level of detail down on, because at the end of the day, we're talking about how a leader makes decisions and maybe what stalls them out and what's actually going to be material to the business in terms of how they're leading. And so that's what we're really trying to uncover patterns around.
Okay. We've probably spent a bunch of time, and I probably should have done this more upfront, but like you have a product, I think it's called Alchemize, that basically is the evaluation of these people. So maybe you could talk to me a little bit about the process that you go through and then what's measured and like what's the outcome for like an investor.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I know we're recording here, but we're the founder readiness level is the initial product that we created for founders. Okay. We're going through a bit of a rebrand right now, but that was the original product. And yeah, so basically what happens is we send founders or investors a link. They sign on to a video interface platform, and they sit there for about 45 minutes, and they answer 14 open-ended or scenario-based questions. And then we take the transcript data from that and we score them according to the 6 constructs. They get a dashboard, the investor gets a dashboard, and the investor does not see the founder's dashboard, and they're written for very different audiences, but they convey essentially risk factors, growth factors, and then what to do about them.
It's kind of interesting. I guess I'll use my own experience on this, and I'm curious about the imbalance a little bit. So when I started with Concur, we were really small, and basically I went through a couple days of interviews. It was more than I expected, but then they said you got the job, but there's one more thing you have to go. You have to go talk to an industrial psychologist, and I was kind of like, what? And so basically what they were trying to do was they had built a model on what their founders were really like and trying to find people that looked like them, structurally. And I guess from it was just a weird step in that process where basically I felt like I just done all the work to basically go through all these interviews, and now you're telling me I got this one step that seems really nebulous. Do you think there's some level of that with this, where it's like, I'm an investor, I like what I'm hearing, I'm now asking you to go do this, and now I've kind of got this situation where my check is dependent on what I say to these questions. Does it create kind of a power imbalance, or how do you set that up where this is just part of the process and we set that up front?
Yeah, I think how things are delivered and the perception of them is sometimes half the battle or more, And so I really hear you on, it's like you think it's a done deal and then you get this. I think that's a poor process. I would not advocate for that as a process. I think it's good to be upfront, what the expectations are. And so I'll say a few things to great question, by the way, I just love this. I'll say one thing is that we very much are positioning this as an augmentation or an additional layer of insight for the investors. So it's you still do your process and you still go with your, figure out your gut feeling and your reference checks and your warm intros. This is a layer of people analytics you can use in your decision making. And so that's one piece. And then how it's presented to founders is this is part of a decision-making process. And wouldn't you like to know that there's more rigor to the evaluation than just a gut check? to me, I think it's most unfair when you meet with someone, there's no criteria other than what do you do for fun? And, oh, cool, you went to Yale, and that they just make a decision based on those factors. There's all sorts of things going on in their head, right? But they're not sharing that. And that to me just seems too informal. So there's got to be like some level of, and when you apply for a corporate job, and maybe you're pointing to this, but I have had to go through assessments for business school or corporate jobs. So like, it's just part of the process. So I think there's a couple things there, but I think it's very much like, how is this presented? And is it presented as an antagonistic thing, or more of like, hey, this is just part of how we make a decision?
Yeah. Who owns the data? Like, does the founder get to see a full report? Like, is there value add to the founder regardless if the investor invests? Like, because I think if that's the case, then it's a win-win, right? Like, and again, if you set this part of the process and you're going to get this, and there's value for you to get a snapshot of how you are and like what you could do to grow, then I think it's a value add process regardless of how the outcome ends.
Yes, so absolutely, we want to add value to founders and founding teams, and so they receive a dashboard with their results, and it has very action-oriented language. It goes into detail about how we score, what higher scores and lower scores mean, and there's coaching that we can offer outside of any sort of investor engagement that can help founders as they continue to evolve. So, yeah, absolutely, we want this to be a value add for anyone who takes it.
Yeah. How does this work between like you and your co-founder, right? Like, I mean, you guys both come from very different backgrounds, right? And so have you guys done some of this analysis for you and like from you guys? Like, I mean, obviously you're dog fooding it. And I'm just kind of curious on like, as that's kind of evolved, has there been good takeaways for you and kind of understanding like lane assignments, overlaps of where you guys have complementary skills, as well as like, these are the rails for us to run on?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that it's obviously very important to eat your own dog food. I was one of the first people to take it. My scores surprised me a little bit. They were mostly in line with what I expected, but a few of them were lower than what I expected. So I got and my co-founder is the one who delivered my results and my readout. So he got to give me some poignant like examples, very tangible things I could do to improve my leadership. For example, I tend to not be as vocal or share externally like how I'm making a decision. And so it creates a little bit of uneasiness with the team I'm leading, where they don't know where my head's at with a decision-making process. And so because I tend to like move quickly and I'm pivoting all the time, iterating. So that was interesting. And then, yes, I would say between us, he tends to be the more academic and go deep and like really build the thing from scratch. I tend to be more of like, let's throw spaghetti against the wall and see what the market says.
Did that help? But like, you know, you see a lot of founder conflicts happen over time, especially like, I mean, you guys have some philosophical differences from where you started, right? And so in a lot of cases, an academic may want to like focus on things and make it perfect. And you may start up with saying like, we just need to get it out, right? There's always that like tension. How do you think like these tools like interface on this? I just had a really messy divorce with a set of founders that basically had gone through the last 11 years together, and they just parted.
Wow.
And it was difficult. You know, one of them didn't scale as much, and they were kind of drifting. And it turned out that like one was running the business, the other one was doing engineering, and the people just felt like there were two companies, right? There was two kind of strategies and two cultures that were dividing kind of them moving forward. And so obviously we would have loved to seen that way sooner. It worked okay. Like people, you know, are still talking to each other, giving Christmas cards, but it was a disappointing outcome to a partnership that had lasted a long time.
Yeah, I mean, my question would be like, if you had used a tool, you know, our tools or some other approach, could you have picked up on some of these flags sooner and like watched them over time, or given more of, I don't want to use the, like tending to the relationship a bit more, knowing that these are areas of weakness. And I think that's where we don't necessarily make space for kind of putting attention to differences sometimes, and we just keep going and kind of have our blinders on. And so that's where I feel like we have to make space for the what we've called the softer skills, or like the people side of this infrastructure that we're missing. It's like just become an informal infrastructure when really there are a lot of patterns that need to be like attention needs to be put towards and like cultivated. These skills need to be cultivated.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guilty of this, right? You want to continue to work on the next piece, right? You're always kind of moving forward. And so there's that speed pieces of it. But like there's basically some relationship hygiene that needs to happen, just like you do in like your personal life, well, right? You know, it's like you have a spouse and partner, and you have to work on that. I think this is an area that doesn't get invested enough, where people talk about it because we're always on to the next thing, whether it was success or failure. And so I do think you're right. I think there are those types of tools that you're talking about probably would have raised these concerns earlier, and it may have ended up with the same exit ramp, but it may have done it in a much more constructive way, or it may have been said, hey, there's more room to grow here because we understand some of these challenges.
Yeah, and also just time wasted figuring someone out when you can illuminate the patterns sooner and just be more transparent about them. Like there's definitely things that are harder to change. There's some things about yourself that are easier to change, but I think it would be nice to have a more transparent sense of the blueprint of someone when you're entering into these. It is like people have talked about it as in some ways closer than most marriages. Like when you partner with someone to do a startup, it's so intense, and you spend more time with them often than you do your partner, whether it's a marriage or otherwise. But yeah, so I think a lot of what I've been trying to draw attention to in the market is just paying more attention and looking at these quote unquote failures or breakups as opportunities to prevent future ones from happening, and therefore have better innovation outcomes and better outcomes for the investors. And, I think there's this whole acceptance of the early stage investing world that like the power law is king. And I don't understand where that assumption fully comes from, is where it's just like, well, 9 out of 10 are going to fail. And so we're just not going to pay attention to those. Even if they're like doing well, we're still just don't, at the end of the day, it's really not a priority it's the 1 out of 10 that we're really going to put our attention towards. So.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more on this one. I do feel like there's some laziness in that, right? Where it's just like, 1 out of 10 is going to work. But if you had 7 out of 10 actually do okay, and basically that distribution was more evenly distributed, your portfolio looked pretty good. But it does take work, right? I mean, it does take work. And so I think it is partly a function of the roles that a lot of VCs or investors provide. They're not certainly, most of them, I'm generalizing, aren't operators, right? They're not bringing a lot of operational expertise, which is what I see a lot of founders need. They have energy, they have drive, they're smart, they understand their market in most cases. But like understanding how to build a company, you got to get to Andreessen Horowitz or some of the larger Sequoias or some of these other ones where they'll provide it. And there's a huge gap in the middle of people just saying, I'll write you a check, I'll give you access to my network, but I'm not really there to help you. And I think what you're trying to do is provide better tools that maybe give them a better chance of having that success. And a base hit, a double or a triple, that's great for the founder, and it should be good for the investor.
Yeah, you said it perfectly. I mean, that's kind of what a big question along the way of just trying to understand where this. I mean, I have some good theories for why it is the way it is, but it would be nice to help move, especially since most VCs aren't outperforming the market. Like, it's very interesting to me that this is still kind of industry standard. So
let's go back to the whole thing. Like, can you give me like a case study of like maybe a seed level investment where investor was like, chop, this looks really good. And then basically they're either flags or how this like shaped it. It doesn't need to be something that said, I was yes and now I'm no. I think I'd love something that's much more nuanced where it's like saying, I'm a yes, this raised some flags, and then the team basically we worked together to figure out a way to like make this a good opportunity that scaled and was a win for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still in pilot phase with a number of our clients. We haven't gotten to the point where a lot of decisions have yet been made based on our tool, I would say. We're still very much like working with accelerators and universities and VCs to figure out that pain point and like where this is best suited. And I think what we're hearing from the market is that it's actually a lot more interesting for VCs in particular to use it after they decide to write the check. That there was one group, a fairly large clean tech VC that really has been using some assessment tools and saw ours as a much more sophisticated, strategic dive into a person or team's capabilities as leaders. And so wants to use it after they decide to write the check to use for follow-on coaching and such. So that's really like, I would say, more of what we're seeing an appetite for.
Okay, that makes sense. I think you wrote on LinkedIn recently something to the effect of, founders spending money on investor lists and spreadsheets not really being a strategy. The investment landscape has changed quite a bit over time. And so what do you think that looks like today? I mean, I think like if you're a founder and you're kind of going through this process, what's a smarter way to kind of think about approaching these folks so that you kind of get the outcome you want?
In terms of raising capital and just finding the right capital partners. Well, I mean, I think we're in this, very disruptive period where, to me, I mean, one of the things front and center that I'm facing too as a founder is just how do you manage AI? I think showing that you have the capability to really integrate AI in a thoughtful way into your company is like paramount. But I would say alongside that, this complexity measure that we're offering is a really good proxy for, how you're likely going to behave and think and act in these complex environments. And so having something like this to show an investor, like I took this assessment and I scored pretty high on, this complexity piece, kind of demonstrates my ability to hold all of these moving parts as like the market's even more complicated and disruptive. And so I think it's, putting some of those conversational pieces, even if you don't take the assessment, like thinking about how you are, what might be the opportunities in your team and how you've stress tested your team against some of these exogenous factors. Like, what have you been through before that's going to demonstrate that you can unify and work together in this complex environment? And so I think just speaking to some of those people patterns is going to be a differentiator. I don't meet many founders who, I've been pitched to a lot. I worked for a family office network, and then I had my own investment banking group for a number of years. And so I've seen a lot of founder pitches. Almost no one leads with, beyond their credentials, they don't lead with the team or maybe how they met and their credentials, but they don't necessarily talk about their team as a unit or like their capabilities under complexity and things like that. So I think that's really a differentiator.
I would agree with you to a certain extent. I think that, I've sat through a lot of pitches and I've worked for some VCs. It's not the number one thing they care about to start with, right? It's always a slide in the deck, right? The team, and it's something that they want, but it's like, get me the idea, the problem first, right? Like they always want to know the problem, how big the TAM is, and then how you're going to solve it, and then who's behind it. So, like in my opinion, it's like the third block that basically people focus on. So I think when you're pitching, if it's not the thing that they care about the most, you basically prioritize it accordingly. I don't disagree with you. I think my thesis is very similar to yours, but maybe a level up. I always look for teams that execute well, right? Like I think, and those usually are a byproduct of they know how to communicate, they know how to differentiate, they know how to delegate and understand and communicate well. Because if you can, even if you get the strategy a little bit wrong, but you're still executing well, you can always pivot, right? And so I think we see that quite a bit. So I don't know, any comments on that?
Execute. So talking about how but I think we're still talking about, we're still in the same zone, which is like, yes, of course I agree, you need to be solving an important problem and there needs to be a big market for it. But when people present themselves as a team, I think one of the differentiating factors is, okay, how do we as a team deal with execution risk? Or what happens if we get in a conflict or like 2/3 of our team leaves for some reason? Like, what are we going to do about that in terms of our resilience as a team? Like, I just think bringing some of those issues up and showing strength in that way can really differentiate your pitch.
I agree with you. I think the language you just used there is quite a bit different than what people normally do. They kind of go through the bios of the three people,
Yeah,
right? That's
exactly.
exactly what they do. They don't do anything about like how do we actually operate. And so I think that if you could do that, that would be differentiating. I agree with you.
Yeah, I'd love to see more founders and founding teams pitching accordingly, or accelerators helping train people in this way, like more of a stress test your team, execution risk, talk about like, yourself as a unit and how you're going to be resilient.
So what about distribution? Like, I guess I'm maybe projecting here a little bit, but like if you made this almost free or very close to free for the entrepreneur, and basically they get some feedback to it, but it creates a database of people that you can link to deals, does that start to create a flywheel effect and really the platform you're looking for over time? And maybe that is your go-to-market strategy. I have no idea.
Yeah, well, that hasn't been our core focus to date. I would say we're pivoting ourselves, but we've been making the case to VCs and accelerators to use this as a, either as an application tool or deciding on who to invest in or bring into a cohort, or post-investment decision making to like help the founders or founding team grow and evolve. But yes, I think there's definitely, we explored one partnership with a group, it's still ongoing, but where they're creating a two-sided platform for founders and investors to do some matchmaking. And we were making the case of like, let's use our tool as a basis for helping the founder like strengthen their profile. And so, yes, we are very, very much, as we've automated our capabilities, the cost is lowered. And so it does make it a lot more accessible for founders. And we're really excited about exploring that further. So,
maybe talk to me a little bit about how there's quite a bit of education for this, right? Like, I mean, you're basically creating a new marketplace and a new space for this, right? You're trying to raise the visibility. You're doing it based on research, and then you're providing a tool that solves a problem in the industry that people don't necessarily always think that this is the problem, right? They're still in the power law manner. So talk to me about this, because I think lots of founders have this problem where I have a great idea, but I have to educate the market for it to even be there. Maybe there's not a lot of competitors. There's not a lot of talk about this. So, obviously coming on a podcast like this and getting some exposure and working on that is great. But like education before you get to the sales is like a tough part. Whereas if you're in a competitive market where people already know what the products do, and then you're
like
just competing, it's very
different.
Yeah, right. And so maybe talk to me a little bit about that journey for me.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's a lot of education. So I started my my go-to-market strategy with my own direct contacts, which have been in impact investing. And so my hunch was the impact investing community, given its focus on positive outcomes in investing, would have more of an appetite for something like this. And I got so much interest, like kind of I wouldn't say that my Zoom was ringing off the hook sort of thing, like captured a lot of curiosity, had a lot of intro calls. And then, I think it's a combination of sales cycles are long. And, in terms of, we ran into this issue that you highlighted, which was like, people didn't necessarily want to use it to make a decision on someone, but like post-investment. And so that's kind of what we learned from the market. But along the way, I am sitting here kind of being like, wow, this is a big kind of educational journey that we have to take people on. So we have to kind of change our expectations about the sales cycle, I think, is one thing just on a practical level. And the other thing is I've just been doing a lot more thought leadership. Like, it led me to do these podcasts. I'm talking to a lot of universities who have a lot of interest in like the data analytics side of this and like the patterns for students and writing, papers and stuff like that. I have been writing some of my own articles and publishing on that and LinkedIn, and just kind of realizing that like part of the role that we're playing is education, and that offering like free content and usable tools is actually it's part of the process. It's just like, I've been reading a lot of Alex Hormozi's work about like the importance of generating value. And so I think until we show people that we can generate tangible value, like it makes sense that it's taking a while for them to like, pull the trigger on fully embedding this new kind of process into their thinking. So it's just kind of like, I think it's just understandable you have to think about it as fun and curious. And then like, how do you actually, what does value creation really mean? And it might mean you don't charge for something immediately. Like you have to actually, it's the value versus charging piece that I think we're learning about.
Yeah, it's top of funnel, right? You're basically just trying to get interest, right? And so be an authority. I guess what I didn't hear in that was like, have you had to refine your ICP, like that you're really going after? Like you've talked about a couple of areas that you think the demographics really fit well, but like when you talk about thought leadership and when you talk about reaching different platforms and different audiences, the smaller the better and to start with, right? If you can make that impact, because those are the people that are going to be the ones that'll get into your funnel and hopefully come down over time. How has that worked? I mean, you've had a couple of different theses as you started this to where you are today, and maybe it'll change some more. How does like thought leadership fit in making sure I'm getting to the right audience?
Yeah. So again, we were kind of focused on the VC accelerator community, and we are positioning ourselves to meet the needs of like small to mid-size enterprises now, like between kind of 25 people and 2,000 people who have like more established HR functions and who are doing a lot of hiring, maybe are experiencing some turnover, they're doing like promotion cycles. And so we feel like this tool, again, because we can create any sort of assessment we want and ask a variety of questions with transcript data, we're kind of positioning ourselves to meet that market. That's our current focus.
Yeah, good. If you fast forward, let's say that this becomes kind of an industry norm over the next 5 to 10 years, how does the startup ecosystem actually change? Like, do you think that there's some material changes that happen? Like, do you think obviously you'd like to see the hit rate and people building sustainable businesses? It doesn't need to be unicorns. Obviously, those are great. But there's a lot of stuff. AI is empowering lots of people to get off the sidelines that maybe don't think of themselves as entrepreneurs and build niche applications. And so does this, allow a hit rate to be better and to make sustainable businesses, or do you see it transforming it differently?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different things. One is, I'll start where you started, which is I think we'll see hopefully better teams forming with like complementary skill sets that have a bit more transparency around like strengths and weaknesses. And, I would love to see more low-cost coaching come out of this. Like we're looking at AI tools to help people kind of like prompts and things like that to help based on the baseline of how they scored, like here's what to consider to grow in these areas. So I can see that the whole AI space taking over on the coaching side a little bit, although not totally. And I think we'll also hopefully see less founder breakups. I think we'll also see less people deciding to be CEOs, like in a way. Like I think a lot of people have this romanticized vision of what it's like to lead a company. And I get it. Like Silicon Valley's done a nice job, making it seem like this really sexy job. And I think when you get down to it, it's really hard and a slog in the beginning,
lonely,
especially.
And lonely. Yeah, it's a tough one.
And lonely. Yeah. And so in some ways, there's many, like I'll take universities, for example. There's a lot of great research universities who spin out great technologies, but then the faculty who started the research initiative want to then be the founder or CEO, and they fail miserably. And it's like, wouldn't a tool like this be great to better understand like whether or not you're in a good position to be a CEO? And so I think just teasing out people patterns and hopefully having better outcomes in early stage companies.
Yeah, well, that's good. Maybe the last question for you. If a founder is like listening to this and they can't afford the assessment or don't have access to a coach, what do you think they should think about in this realm? Because I think what you're talking about is super important. We don't spend enough time on it. And if people, don't leverage their tools or they don't have the money to get a coach, like where do they start?
Well, we have pretty, I would say, accessible pricing for especially our automated tools. So I would say we can take any of your publicly available, like we could take all of your podcasts and do something. We could run our analysis on it and provide you something of value. So, I think there's just being aware that, yes, there's an assessment. Yes, there's human coaching, but there's other tools and offerings we can provide. Yeah.
Okay, well, good. Logan, this was a lot of fun. I appreciate you playing ball and giving us some feedback on it. If people want to learn more about what you're doing and where to contact you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, we can be reached at www.founderready.io. Founderready.io. You can also send us an email at faq@founderrl.com. founderrl.com. So yeah, I would love to hear from anyone who's curious about this topic. I love discussing it and debating as well. But yeah, we have a lot of, our capabilities are pretty broad, and we can, like I said, look at patterns in how you're presenting as a leader. So it's pretty exciting times with AI.
Well, good. Well, thanks for taking the time, Logan. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Todd.
Thanks for listening to Startup Stories from the Treehouse. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, follow, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you found our conversation helpful, leave a review. It really helps other founders discover our show. For more insight and episode summaries, don't forget to subscribe to the Wildfire Lab Substack. We appreciate your support and can't wait to share more stories with you next time.